Jeb, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you, Andy. It's nice to be on.
So in my book, Amp Up Your Sales, I focus on strategies sellers can use to amp up their sales, or in other words, accelerate their sales. So in your mind, what is sales acceleration? It's become such a buzzword today. And how do you define it?
Well, that's such a broad term, sales acceleration, excuse me.
Right.
But I do dig amping up your sales. And I think that it's important that salespeople are looking at every opportunity to amp up every skill, every talent, their ability to deal with people, their commission checks. We just live in this hyper competitive global economy where the fit are truly surviving. I mean, evolution in the business marketplace is it's incredible, and it's evolving so fast that if you don't stick with it, if you aren't constantly, as you say, focusing on amping up your skills so you can sell more, you're going to get left behind. And a lot of salespeople are, and for various reasons. Mostly because we live in this age of I only call it disruptive change,
right?
And where it's coming at you. So from sales acceleration, it's just such a broad, ubiquitous term that everybody's throwing out all over the place. I'm not exactly sure I have an answer for you that would tell you, other than I can tell you that my clients are always looking at the ways that they can speed up the sales cycle. Although some of them are getting really smart and recognizing that the faster they speed the sales cycle up, the less competitive they get, and they lose their competitive advantage because they're tending to move faster than they really should be in that process.
Well, let's explore that a little bit, because that's interesting. Because research shows, and certainly when I work with clients, and where we're finding is, if you can help the customers make a decision more quickly, then chances of your odds of winning the business go up fairly substantially. But you're saying people are sometimes going faster than the customers are prepared to go?
Well, there's so much focus on inbound marketing. So, through social media and through inbound and through lead generation, and many of my clients are really mashing together their inbound and outbound teams. So
right.
There's some people knocking on doors, some people making outbound calls, some people taking inbound calls. That because there's so much information on the internet, what happens is you've got customers coming at you on the phone and they're saying, hey, give me a price, give me this, do a demo, give me some information. And salespeople see that as an opportunity to accelerate or to progress the sales process further down the road. And what happens is they give away everything they've got, especially in demos and in software, or software as a service or cloud-based system. They give away everything. The customer goes away and says, "Okay, thank you," and they go with another vendor. And what I'm finding is that clients who are slowing that process down and ensuring that their salespeople are starting at the beginning of the sales process and moving through the sales process, they're having better results. They're able to be more competitive, and they're slowing the customer down long enough so that they have an opportunity to really show the customer where they can add value in the customer's life cycle, or in their product, or in their service, or with their own clients.
Yeah, I mean, what I talk about is that, being responsive is not the same thing as being fast. The race doesn't go to the swift, it goes to the responsive. So if you're responsive to what the information the customer needs, and what the customer needs to learn in order to find out what the best solution for their problem might be, then, again, your odds of winning the business go up, but that doesn't mean you're always going to be the fastest.
Well, and responsive isn't talking at your customer and giving them everything. Responsive is not pitching. So a customer calls up and they've got a bunch of questions. What salespeople who are getting left behind or failing are doing are answering the questions.
Yeah.
What salespeople who are winning are doing are asking questions about what's important to the customer.
Yes.
So you're exactly right on being responsive. In fact, when I work with companies that are having poor customer experiences, if you really dig down into it, it's almost always because they're not responsive. When I meet salespeople, especially inside salespeople who are failing, it is because they feel like they're being responsive, but in reality, all they're doing is giving everything away.
Yep.
One of my clients last week, and working with their inside sales team, and this very thing was happening. A client would call them up. They spend $1 million a month on inbound marketing to generate leads. The potential client calls them up and says, "Can you tell me about?" The salesperson spends 20 minutes telling them about. The client hangs up and goes away. 70% of their calls end up in no sale because they're giving away too much information. In fact, they're basically assuming that the client's going to buy without truly understanding what that client's situation is, and then crafting or shaping or bridging a solution to that client's unique situation.
Right.
And that's what I really mean by slowing it down. It's taking time to really understand the customer and not assuming just because the customer says, hey, I want this information, that they've already made the decision to buy from you.
Exactly. Or that they even understand the questions that they don't know the answers to. And,
good point.
Right. And I think that's one of the things that salespeople oftentimes mix up on, as you talked about, is they assume that since customers have educated themselves online, that they necessarily know all the questions that they need to have answered or that they should be asking, and they really don't. And I think the role of the salesperson, I think for a key skill for an individual is questioning, right? Is how to be able to ask those right questions and not just assume that the customer knows what they are. So a question I have for you is sort of, if you look at it from an individual standpoint, is what are those key skills that you see that salespeople are lacking, that they really need to be able to amp up their sales in today's hyper-competitive environment, which I agree is what exists?
Well, let's go back to your original premise of sales acceleration. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've created a pretty good foundation for what that means. And let's just think about accelerating the sales process. Asking is a core skill. Far too many sales leaders, salespeople, gurus like us spend all their time focusing on closing. Closing is not a discipline. Closing is a broad brush that we use to usually salespeople who are not closing. They're not closers. The real discipline, and this is the emotional intelligence discipline, is the ability to ask. Yes. If you want to accelerate the sales process, the key is being able to ask for the next step. It's being able to do all the things right in that particular sales call, and then moving to the next step. Right. And that's a discipline. Questioning is a discipline. So asking questions, the ability to ask questions and listen to people, is a core discipline in sales. And bridging is one of the disciplines, again, that accelerates the sales process, because if I ask great questions of you, you tell me what's important, and I'm able to bridge or connect the dots between what's important to you or what your problems are as a business and how I solve those problems using your language, not mine. You're more likely to forward with me because you say to yourself, hey, this person gets me and understands my problems, and I'm willing to engage or give them more. Mm-hmm. By doing that and constantly asking for the next question, it allows you to move the process faster. And as you say, look, if I can move someone down the road faster and get them to a decision before they get caught up in status quo or worrying or all the things that the customers do when they're trying to make a decision, I'm more likely to win. But what salespeople really miss are those core disciplines. And I tell you, number one is ask for what you want. I see this constantly with sales teams. Salespeople who, especially inside salespeople and outside salespeople, are guilty as well, that they leave a meeting with the customer and they don't have a defined what are we going to do next with the customer and with themselves. Right.
So two things I want to explore there. So one is, how do you teach people to ask good questions?
Well, it starts with helping people to come with questions. So one of the exercises we do in the sales training programs that we offer, and you read People by You, so it's one of your favorite books. So we talk about go-to questions. Mm-hmm. So when I first started in sales, and this is back in the 90s, my sales manager gave me a list of questions. Then I would literally go out in the field, go see my customers for appointments, and then I would have those questions sitting in front of me on a clipboard, while I was talking to the customers. This is long before tablets, back in the dinosaur days of sales. And I would go through those questions, and I would ask them, and pretty soon those questions began to get conversational, right. And then pretty soon they became conversational and situational. So what I help salespeople do, if I'm working with you directly, is we'll do an exercise where we craft your go-to questions, usually technical questions. So technical questions are the qualifying questions, they're the fact questions. Mm-hmm. I need to know how much you do of this or when you do that type of thing. And then there are the engagement questions, and the engagement questions are the people savvy questions. What's important to you? Right. How do you make decisions? Those type of things. And we help them put those questions together and then focus on both open-ended questions, so questions that generate a story or get people to really talk. Mm-hmm. And then probing and clarifying questions, which are basically open-ended questions, but they dial you down and they're more follow-up. So we teach people to start, up here with a big funnel and then work their way down until they're able to gather all the information, and then that opens up the door to bridge to a solution. But the key starts with having people learn how to write down questions in their own language. It's easy for me to say, here's a list of questions that you should ask. And a lot of companies do that. But what you find is that salespeople sound like robots.
Yep.
And I can tell you that sales is a conversation, not an interrogation. So the ability to craft and learn how to ask questions in your own words in a conversation, that really becomes critical. And so how do you do that? First, you help people do it. They begin to build their questions. You give them some frameworks. And the next thing you do is you practice and practice and practice and practice and practice. Because it does take skill, Andy, to be able to be in the middle of a conversation with a client and not have to think about the next question. In other words, you're able to build your next question off of what the client just said. And that just takes a little bit of practice and time.
Yeah, I agree. Because I really think not only just asking the right question is the key skill, but knowing what question to ask next, as you said, sort of the bridging really becomes the key skill as well. And so, yeah, if you're just on autopilot, which I think is one of the real problems with salespeople these days, is they're given a process and they go execute robotically on the process, and they don't think. And this lack of sort of deliberate, thoughtful planning, I think, is a real shortcoming for a lot of salespeople these days.
It is. I mean, think about it. I see salespeople that ask questions. It's like one of those old spy movies, where the dude's sitting, chained to a chair with a light in his face, and the salesperson is asking questions just in your face, and it's not real. It's not a real connection. And what salespeople fail to understand is that is questions are really the key of sales. And I think if you've been around sales very long, you get that.
Right.
It's the ability to ask questions to get people to talk so I can listen to them. And when I'm listening to someone, it makes them feel awesome. I mean, it's the real key to building these strong emotional connections because it makes people feel important. And that's the one thing that people need more than anything is to feel important. So salespeople don't really understand the connection of asking questions and listening and building their conversation and how that actually makes a customer want to spend more time with you, want to go to the next step.
Exactly.
And the best salespeople, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, I, for lack of better words, I call it dual process. But the very best salespeople, I mean the savants, the people who really get it, the ones that you can't teach anything because they just know, they're the ones that do something that I call dual process. And what I mean by that is that they are able to, and at the same time, be able to stand in their prospect's shoes and be there with complete empathy for the prospect situation, and at the same time understand what their objective for that call is, and use their questions to move the customer towards that objective without losing that emotional connection. And it's something that the best salespeople get intuitively, and you can't teach them.
Yep.
But it's also something that you can teach salespeople to learn how to do. It goes back to practice, and this is my I guess my message to sales leaders and sales managers. If you are not in your sales meetings and your one-to-ones, and every time you get your salespeople together, role-playing those situations, you're hurting your team. You've got to practice and practice and practice. Sales managers these days too often treat their sales team like they went to sales training with some sales trainer and now they know everything. And it's sort of like your favorite NFL team having practiced once a year and then never practice again. Nobody does that. Sales is a skill position, and sales professionals are the elite athletes of the business world, and you've got to treat them that way, and you've got to help them constantly get reconnected to those core skills that you and I both know are important to success.
Right, and I think seems to be this trend in some respects for managers sort of away from being coaches. I've seen discussions online and articles about sales managers hiring coaches to coach their salespeople. I'm like, seriously? I mean, if you're not coaching, if you're a manager and you're not coaching, what are you doing?
Well, my favorite football team in college is the Georgia Bulldogs.
Of course, yes.
So Mark Richt is the head coach of the Georgia Bulldogs, and so if you think about being a sales manager, just imagine if Mark Richt didn't show up to the game. He wasn't on the sideline. he was at home, maybe going out to dinner with his wife and his family, and maybe watching, I don't know, Duck Dynasty or something crazy like that on TV. And the game gets played. He isn't paying attention to it. After it's over, someone emails him the stats, or he goes to his college football dashboard. These days, you kind of have that, and he looks at all the stats. And then he takes a look at the stats, emails back to his team. Here's what you should do in the next game. Right. I mean, imagine that.
Yeah, well, that's exactly.
He would get fired. I mean, they would fire him on the very next game. But sales managers do this every single day.
Oh, yeah.
They're just mailing it in.
Well, sometimes they think it's more important to make sure that their Salesforce records are up to date than going on a sales call with the sales rep.
Well, that's exactly right. But that's one of the cool things about mobile technology. So if you're if you're using Salesforce.com, you go Salesforce 1, it's all there. But what you're looking at is history. If you look at where the record is updated or there's information there, that's what has happened. Yep. You can't change what is going to happen unless you're in the moment with your salesperson, coaching and training and role playing and doing the things that sales managers are supposed to do. Exactly. Sales managers get paid for the success of their people, not for looking at their CRM.
Exactly. So let's extend that a little bit. So imagine you are a VP of sales, you're new to a company, let's say, or you're new to the role, and you want to establish some quick momentum and some quick change in the culture over the first 30 days. Set the tone. So what are the 2 or 3 things that they should be doing?
Well, first, and this sounds cynical, you only have about 30 days because the average life cycle of today's vice president of sales is about 18 months. Yeah. So you better, by God, be moving fast, because if you're not moving fast, they're gonna switch you out.
Right.
But if you want to move your sales team really, really, really fast, and you're a VP of sales, go invest in your sales managers. Because the sales manager is the pivot point, is the leverage point for every single sales team. And unfortunately, most sales organizations will spend millions of dollars educating their salespeople and spend nothing on their sales manager. So if I'm a VP of sales, the first thing I'm doing is I'm getting with my sales managers and I'm doing exactly what you said. I'm going to get them hands-on. I want every sales manager in the field riding with a rep, or if I'm an inside sales team, I want my sales managers on the floor sitting next to a rep.
Right.
It pains me when I walk into my clients' offices and I see their leaders, especially in inside sales, sitting in other offices. Inside sales, the entire sales team is right there in front of you. You can touch everybody, and you're sitting in an office looking at a computer screen. If you want to move a sales team, go get in front of them and help them. Yep. If I'm a VP of sales, that's the first thing I'm doing. I mean, there's a million things that you can do. My stake in the ground is that if you're a sales manager, you are not working unless you are standing in front of a salesperson.
Right. What's the second thing you do?
The second thing I would do with a sales organization, I'd look at activity. The number one reason for failure in sales, pure and simple, is activity. If it's an outside sales team, it's their prospecting activity, it's what they're putting into the pipe, and it's what they're moving through the pipe. So when you talk about accelerating sales, if I look at pipeline velocity, which to me is a better measure of sales acceleration than anything else. So how long does it take for me to get things in the pipe and get them out of the pipe? So the first thing I'd look at is what's stalled.
Yep.
And I'd either get rid of it. In fact, when I took over a broken sales team at one point in my career, and the very first thing I did was sit down with every salesperson, which was a lot of work because it was, I was going around my sales managers, and we would look at their 30, 60, 90-day pipelines. And it was brutal because it was get it out, get it out, get it out, get it out. Salespeople holding on to things. So you want to first look at what's getting put in and how fast things are moving through. And if I want to really move the team, what I'll do is I'll refocus their efforts on activity, prospecting activity, moving things into the pipeline activity. And one of the core things I see with sales teams today is follow-up activity. So we've gotten really good at inbound marketing. We've gotten really good at bringing clients into us, especially software, cloud-based software services, but a lot of companies that are able to sell more over the phone than they have in person in the past. And what happens is they generate a lot of calls. Well, a lot of those calls come in, and the salesperson either sends out information, does a quick demo, but there's some next step. And what I find is that that those calls, those follow-up calls, tend to go into a black hole because companies are hiring people who are really good at taking calls, but not really good at making outbound calls. And if the sales leadership team isn't focusing on systematically moving their salespeople to pick up the phone and move those deals forward, they end up losing. So you can look at that as well as activity. And if it's an outbound sales team, you can look at that. And the other thing with your inside sales teams, especially on the inbound, it's taking a look at how much time they're spending on the telephone. Came back from a client 2 weeks ago, crazy as it sounds, but 50% of their inbound sales team's time was spent doing something other than talking to customers, 50%.
Yeah.
So if you want to move that bar really quickly, just keep them off the not ready button and they're taking calls. Yep. So the second thing I would do would be activity. First thing, get sales managers for their people. Second thing is activity. And I know you're going to ask me for a third thing. So
two is good.
Yeah, the third thing is if I'm a VP of sales, it's getting them fired up.
Yeah.
It's taking a look at training, motivation, anything that you can do to make them feel good. I truly believe this at the heart that if you're flipping over a leader at the VP level, there's probably some deep down inside the sales organization, some negative energy or something that's impacting them.
Yep.
And I know these are soft skills, and everybody likes to talk about all this, the science of selling. But the reality is, if your sales team feels awesome, they'll tend to go out and be awesome.
Yep.
And if they feel awesome, they'll be more responsive. And if they think that you love them and feel that you love them, that they'll tend to treat your customers better. And I think that it's short-lived. I mean, when you go in and you motivate people, it's sort of like eating Chinese food. At the end of the meal, you're still hungry, and they'll want more and more and more. But you've got 30 days to get the team fired up: sales management, activity, and then focus on motivation.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think those are great things. I mean, I'd sort of add to a couple of what you said. One is on the activity is I do a focus on qualification skills because part of the reason there's so many bad prospects in the pipeline is they haven't qualified them, right? Or if they've qualified them improperly. So that really becomes a key skill to be able, along with the activity, because they can't afford to waste time, right, on people that aren't prospects.
That's right, and that's one of the reasons why they spend so much time off the phone.
That's right.
Or they have so many deals that are stalled in their pipeline because the deals weren't properly qualified. I would agree with that totally.
Yeah, and I also think I agree with you on your second point too. Is that I think the fastest way to get things going is to focus on follow-up. Follow-up, that is where so much potential can be unlocked. When I work with a client for the first time, that's where we start because we can find more business in their sort of lack of follow-up, either when it's to leads or to existing prospects that you can mine more quickly. And then what you get out of that is you get success for these people. They start, and I think your point is great on the third point, is like getting them motivated, is that sometimes they just need to win a little, right? Part of the reason you're getting rid of somebody is not just because people are unhappy, but if they're unhappy, they're not performing. If they're not performing, they're not winning. So they need some winning experience.
It's true. Well, they begin telling the story that they can't win. I mean, exactly. they begin feeling like losers, that they can't get anything done. And if you don't help them believe that they can, you're not going to get anywhere. I mean, just the entire conversation that they're having with clients is I guess they start the conversation believing that they're going to lose.
So let's spend the last few minutes of the conversation here talking about a point you brought up, which I think is a huge point these days for sales in general, because not just inside, but outside sales too. If you read some of the studies that are done, like CSO Insights and so on, they're saying, hey, salespeople are only spending 45% of their time actually selling, and the rest is doing God knows what. So how do you fix that? How do you get them to spend more time in front of customers?
Okay, so that's the whole thing. It's the God knows what, right? They're spending time on God knows what. And you read these articles, and the articles are, well, companies are burdening their salespeople with this and this and this and this and this. And I'm not saying that's not true. I'm not saying that companies aren't giving their salespeople paperwork to do and what have you, but it's always been that way.
Yeah.
And I'm not a big fan of the apologists who say the company needs to change something for the sake of the salespeople. I have the luxury, I guess the privilege of being able to work with clients across the spectrum. It's one of the great joys of my practice is that I don't specialize in any particular industry, nor do I specialize in inside or outside selling. And so one of the things that I find, and qualifications is one of those deals, is I'm always looking at how much time people are spending on particular activities. And I can tell you that 90% of the reason why salespeople are not doing the stuff that they're supposed to be doing is because the salesperson chooses not to do the stuff that they're supposed to be doing.
I agree.
The reason I can stand here and tell you that is in all of those organizations that have that 40% of salespeople are doing God knows what, there's a group of salespeople, top 5, top 10, top 20%, that are crushing it.
Yep.
They're making tons of money. They're out there in front of customers. And every time somebody comes to them and says, I've got something else I want you to do, they basically give them the proverbial F you, and they move on, and they go take care of customers. And people whine and complain about them. Hey, the salespeople won't do anything, but nobody's going to fire them because they're out there closing business.
Yep.
And then there's this whole other group of salespeople that are willing to do all that other stuff that God knows what. They're willing to do that because they would rather do that than actually face-to-face with the customer. And why is that happening? Because the sales manager is sitting in their office looking at a dashboard instead of being out in the field or in a seat next to their salesperson. That's why it's happening. So the whole, let's tear everything apart and look for stuff and companies are to blame. Companies are blamed for a tiny sliver of the reason why salespeople aren't working. Salespeople and sales leaders are to blame for most of it. I know those words are harsh, and most people won't like what I'm saying, but it's the truth.
Oh, it's the absolute truth. Absolute truth. I agree 100%. In fact, I was with a client last week where that was the problem, is the salespeople were choosing to do the things they could do that sort of are part of the job, but weren't really, right? They oftentimes, you get salespeople that will gravitate toward the things that aren't talking to customers because that's easier to do.
It is. And they snow the sales leadership team into believing that they can't go get in front of customers because they have all this other stuff to do because the sales leaders don't get in the field and observe what they're actually doing. And when I say field, inside, sitting next to somebody, outside, being in a car with them, but the sales leaders don't go look. So the sales leaders accept those excuses and don't hold people accountable, and don't train them how to use their time effectively. I don't know very many salespeople that don't struggle with time management, territory management. So the sales leader's role is to coach them and help them and show them and get them to become aware of the things that are holding them back and help them tie that to where their commission check will be. I mean, it's not just telling them to go do it, but you got to coach them as well. And just go back to what you said earlier, Andy, and I think you're dead on, is that, sales leaders are not spending time coaching. And in fact, they'd rather hire a surrogate to come do it for them. Yep. Thank God I make a living doing that. But the reality is that in most cases, in most situations, everybody that I work with in a company that's having a struggle knows exactly what the problem is. They're just too busy doing something else to go fix it. And I, end up being an extra set of hands in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think
please don't fire me.
Right. And I think one of the words too that one of the things that's not helping the situation a little bit is all this emphasis on social selling. Is that what I find now is we're getting these salespeople, especially some of the newer salespeople, feel like they have to get perfect information about the person before they reach out and try to contact them, right? A potential prospect. And so they spend all this extra time digging through and checking social streams and Twitter streams and LinkedIn and so on, instead of just picking up the phone and calling.
So let me address that because you're touching on. I might have to get on my soapbox now.
That's okay.
So let me take. I'm going to take two premises from this, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
So the first is that the salespeople think they have to have everything perfect, so they're planning to plan to make the call.
Right.
And so the call never happens.
Right.
So don't blame that on social media. That was happening in 1990 and 1980 and 1970 and 60s and the 50s. It was just different back then because now you can get that information so much faster than you could back then. But all of the salespeople that were basically losing, that were sub-optimized, they've always done that. They've been afraid to make the call or unwilling to make the call. But there's a big difference. Now we have an entire generation of salespeople who would rather send a text message or ping you on Twitter than actually talk to you. And I'll granted, I'll give you that that we've got people who are less comfortable actually having real conversations with people. But the whole planning to plan has always been a problem for salespeople, and sales leaders are responsible for this because they don't sit next to salespeople and help them get prospecting done. And the second problem is the fallacy that social selling will actually make you money. And if you'll give me a second and humor me, let me tell you a quick story. So I had one of my salespeople, young kid, come in and working for me. Now, I'm a sales trainer, guru, if you want to call me. I write books on sales, and I spend a lot of time doing this. And my company, SalesGravy, we sell employment advertising and recruiting as part of our offering in our whole sales enablement platform. And selling advertising for, you have an open sales job, you want to post a job on SalesGravy, it's an inside sales job. It is a brutal, high activity. You get told no 1 million times every single day. And if you score a couple of deals a day, you won. So this kid comes in and tells me that the way I've been doing it, and I swear to God, he uses the term old school, which made me feel like I was, really old. He said, you've been doing it all old school. He had gone to this webinar about LinkedIn and how he could get all of his leads and everything he needed on social media. So I said, okay, put $10 on the table. I said, I'll bet you $10. You spend a week on LinkedIn. I'm going to spend a week doing it old school style. And we said, okay. So the first day, he spent the entire day on LinkedIn, and I spent the entire day in my database making outbound calls to prospective customers.
Right.
At the end of the day, I closed business. At the end of the day, he came in smiling because 7 people returned his connection request. And this went on for the entire week. At the end of the week, I sold 14 deals, and I had credit cards and cash money for in the bank for those things. At the end of the day, he had made umpteen million connections with people and had sold nothing. And when I showed him the numbers, he explained to me that I didn't really understand. It takes a whole lot longer on that way than my way. And I said, well, okay, let's just figure this out from a commission check. I took the calculator. This is how much money you would have made this week doing it my way. Here's how much money, 0, you made doing it your way. Right. Which would you prefer? He said, well, I would prefer the money. And took a little bit of conversation, and he had to give me my $10, and I proved him wrong. Right. Now, does that mean that social media is not helpful? Absolutely not. I mean, I was in the office this morning basically to tell a couple of my folks that they were morons for not, being present on social media, because there's opportunity there and they need to be connecting and they need to be doing those things. But this idea that I'm going to be able to use social selling to replace picking up the phone is ludicrous, and it's a lie. And it is, and I agree with you. I think it's corrupting the minds of a lot of the young salespeople that are coming into industries across the board. You have to, as you did in 1990 and 1980, and before social media, and today, you have to be able to balance your prospecting across multiple channels and do it relentlessly so that you can get enough stuff in the pipe. And to your point, Andy, you're right on the money. Make sure that when you do get people in the pipe and you're going to work with them, that they're qualified and they can buy your stuff. And if they're not, cut your ties and move on to the next one.
Perfect. I loved it. So, last question. Best piece of advice you could give salespeople about how to amp up their sales?
My advice would be to focus on aligning the way you sell to the way people buy. So just take a typical sales process. You connect or build rapport with people, and you qualify, and then you gather information or you discover, and then you present or bridge a solution. Then you ask for the business, and then you negotiate. And depending on where you are in your industry, we can plug in different names, and there are different stop points along the way, or different steps. But there's a typical sales process from beginning to end that's pretty ubiquitous across most sales organizations, no matter what you want to call it. And salespeople are pretty good at getting into a process and moving forward through the process. Sometimes they skip over steps, and sometimes they don't do them very well, but they know what to do. The key thing is understanding that your prospect doesn't share that prospect.
Right.
Or share that process. Your prospect has a way that they buy. Yep. And there's a difference between their decision-making process, because their decision-making process is typically dictated inside their organization. And that's one of the questions that you want to ask when you're qualifying. Right. But buying process happens internally, because buyers make decisions based on their emotions first, and then they justify those with logic. It's the way the brain works, and the science and the data backs that up over and over and over again. So when you think about the way people buy, the way they buy you, it's like this. Do I like you? It starts there. If they don't like you, they're not going to buy from you. I don't care who you are. They're just not going to buy. Do you listen to me? They want to know that you listen to them. The number one reason why buyers complain about salespeople is that salespeople don't take time to understand their business, listen to them, get them, etc. Do you make me feel important? The most insatiable human need, the singularity for virtually all human behavior is the need to feel important.
Right.
And so buyers need to be actualized. You need to let them know that they're important, and that typically happens through listening to them and understanding their business. Do you get me in my problems? People who are buying from you are not a company, they're human beings. And even though they may be buying something for their company, at the core, they've got a problem that's in their way. And when you can demonstrate that you get them by speaking their language, not your language, they feel like they can trust you. And that's really question number 5. Do I trust and believe you?
Right.
So my best advice for salespeople, as you go through your sales process, focus on answering these 5 questions in the affirmative for your customer. Do I like you? Do you listen to me? Do you make me feel important? Do you get me in my problems? And do I trust and believe you? And I can guarantee you that when you answer those questions in the affirmative, it makes it nearly impossible not to buy from you.
Excellent. Love it. Well, great advice for everybody that's listening to this and watching this. And Jeb, I appreciate the time.
Me too. It's been nice to meet you. And let me ask you, I know this is your interview, but let me ask you, what's your best advice for salespeople?
Couple things. One is listening, which is one you talked about. 2 is, I'm a big believer in understanding your customer's business, right? I mean, the more that you know about your customer's business, then the better you're going to be able to help them. Because customers, again, as you said, they not only think that salespeople aren't listening to them, but they also think that they don't really understand their business, right? So how can you help me if you don't understand what I'm really talking about? And also, if all you're going to do is just be a conduit to bring an expert in, why aren't you the expert? And so, I think that salespeople need to, use the big word, disintermediate sales engineers or wherever, the experts are and become that expert themselves. And, that leads to the third thing, which is sort of aligned with the second, which is be an expert in what you're selling. I'm so disappointed so often when I start working with clients is that their salespeople don't even meet the minimum bar of product knowledge, which is I know my product better than my customers. And, they have to at least meet that minimum bar, but obviously go much beyond that. So really becoming experts to the degree possible, because I think the era of the generalist and selling is coming to a close. Because, hey, how can you really effectively listen to a customer if you're not listening with knowledge behind it, right? I mean, how do you really formulate those, good, insightful questions are going to be if you don't have something more than just a rudimentary knowledge of what it is they're trying to accomplish in their business or how other customers of yours have used your services, your products to gain the value from the investment they made in them. So expertise to me is, learn more, be constantly learning. Sort of like, Jill Conrath has written about in her latest book about the agile seller, the ability to rapidly learn and acquire new information really becomes a key skill. And I really believe that. And I think it's unfortunate that salespeople tend to, they don't have a reading list. I worked with a client last week. Okay, what book is your sales team going to read this month? What's your reading list for the year? Does a salesperson, and Jill Conrath talks about it in terms of an interview question, you ask a potential salesperson, what book have you read in the last 30 days about your craft, about sales? And so it's just, being able to be a learning, thoughtful, deliberate seller, I think is really important, and being an expert.
I agree. I think you're right on the money. I think that again, if you go back to, I go back to late 80s, early 90s, listening to the Brian Tracy's of the world. What was Brian Tracy's core message? Learn, 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 learn. Are you listening to podcasts? And by the way, plug, my podcast on iTunes. Are you listening to that? I listen to every sales podcast all the time in my car. You listen to books, and it's so much easier to learn these days. I mean, even this interview, this can be an MP3 file that you can drop on your phone and plug it into your car on the way on the way to work and the way or on the way home from work.
Right.
Because you're exactly right. The number one complaint that buyers have about sellers is that they don't get to know my business. Number one, and I'll take it a step further, because if as a seller you can't craft a solution for your customer using their language and their unique situation, if you can't do that, you look just like everybody else. It's the ability to take all of that knowledge and apply it in those situations, in those unique situations, that really makes you powerful. And that doesn't happen if you're not investing in yourself up front.
Right. I mean, you use the term bridging. I use the term synthesize, right? Can you take the information the customer gives you and synthesize it into a solution that they understand in their terms? Mm-hmm. So, yeah, well, great. Well, it's been great talking to you, and we'll do this again sometime.
Sounds great. Thank you for having me on today. It was a good conversation.
It was. Thanks, Jeb.
Yes, sir. Bye-bye.